Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from Los Angeles, where it's a beautiful sunny day. I'm outside in my yard at my house, and we're ready to start another episode of Critter Chat. Today's highlighted animal is going to be the wolves, and we're going to talk about wolves specifically, although they represent a much bigger family of animals called the canids, or the dog family. Wolves are definitely carnivores, so that means they eat meat, and they are the largest member of the canid family. Wolves generally are one of the largest dispersed animals in the world. They live across the northern hemisphere, across most of North America, across the northern areas of Europe, and across much of Asia. And it's pretty much all the same species of wolf in all of those spots. Although there are multiple subspecies, some scientists would argue up to as many as 40 subspecies, which is pretty incredible. Some of those subspecies are pretty well documented and pretty well known. Some we still have a lot to learn about. Some of those subspecies would include Arctic wolves that live all the way up in the polar areas of North America and parts of Europe and Asia. Those are typically white wolves, very large, travel and hunt things like caribou. Some of those are going to be wolves that live more in a desert environment, like the Arabian wolves, which are actually the smallest physically of all subspecies of wolves. Those live in the Middle East, in the deserts there. There's also another desert species of wolf that I'm fairly familiar with called the Mexican gray wolf. Those are pretty much limited to an area of Arizona and New Mexico, and there may be a remnant population in Mexico. We're still not sure about that. But we're going to focus on wolves in general, specifically what is called a gray or a timber wolf, which kind of encompasses all of those different types of wolves. Wolves have a pretty good physical range of the sizes that they can be. So the Arabian wolf or the Mexican gray wolf are going to be some of the smaller sized wolves because they live in a desert environment. Smaller sized body is going to help them to be a little more cool as they hunt for their prey there. So they're going to top out around 40 pounds for the Arabian gray wolves. Wolves in the far north are going to be much larger. That's going to help them stay a little warmer in their cold environments. And so some of those big Arctic wolves get up to about 175 pounds. So a huge range of different sizes. Wolves are, of course, the genetic ancestor to our dogs. So dogs are all descended from a wolf ancestor. Different dog breeds have come about through selective breeding manipulated by humans. So just because you have a Chihuahua doesn't mean that that's related to a fox. It's still related closer to wolves, even though they're so much smaller in size. So wolves out in the wild typically live between 6 and 8 years. That average may seem a little low. Some individuals live quite a bit longer. I've read a couple different studies about wolves. The longest one that they've documented in Yellowstone National Park, which is a place where they really have good research information going on about wolves, was 12 and a half years old. But that average is going to be a lot younger because wolves unfortunately have a pretty high mortality rate or death rate for pups. Pups don't always survive, and that brings their numbers down. There's also a lot of other factors that can contribute to wolf deaths that would limit their lifespan. Wolves have really excellent senses. Sense of hearing is very big, very important for them. They have phenomenal eyesight, especially at night. Their night vision is some of the best of most mammals out there. And they have a really good sense of smell, significantly stronger than what we are capable of smelling. Humans, in general, our senses are kind of weak compared to most other mammal species. Wolves have very important communication. They are very social animals, and communication is a big part of their life. And they communicate in two main ways. One is vocally, or through sounds that they can make, like howling, barking, yipping. Their howl is most what they're known for. Their howl can be heard. Oh, sorry, we got a little breeze going on today. Their howl can be heard as far as 6 miles away in a forested setting. And if it's more open environment, it can be heard up to as far as 9 miles away, which is pretty remarkable. They also communicate through body language. So that would be anything from how they're standing or sitting, how they move their ears with one another, where they hold their tail. All of those are very important communication clues because they live in a social group. And for wolves, that social group is called a pack. The pack is usually led by an alpha pair, so they are the two most dominant members of the pack, and they usually call all the shots. They're usually the ones who breed. Now, I say usually because there's always some exceptions, and that has been documented with some of the wolves that they've been able to study. Wolf packs typically range in size from about 6 to maybe 10 individuals, which is good size if you think about like your family whom you may be quarantined at home with right now. If you had 6 or 10 individuals in your family, that would be a lot of people to try to keep happy and to communicate with. So a wolf pack of 6 to 10 is a lot of individuals to try to make sure everybody gets a meal, everybody's happy, everybody's doing what they want to do and enjoying life. Now, some wolf packs have been much, much bigger. The largest wolf pack ever documented was in the United States in Yellowstone National Park. In 2001, the Druid Peak pack reached 37 wolves, which is phenomenal. I actually was in Yellowstone in 2001 and I saw part of that pack. They were not all there at the time I saw them, but I saw, I believe there were like 12 of them in that space at that time. That pack, because they were so large, they then split up that next season and became 4 different packs, which is also pretty incredible because clearly 37 was a lot to try to manage, and they then kind of split up and went separate ways after that. Wolves as a pack are very successful. They cooperatively hunt. They typically go after larger animals for food sources, things like deer, elk, moose, which are all in the deer family, and bison. Some of those things are not always available to them, so they will eat opportunistically things that are smaller. There are cases of wolves that live near the ocean that will sometimes eat crabs or dig up clams. There are cases of wolves that will eat fish, particularly in rivers where salmon spawn and salmon come up those rivers. A salmon's a nice healthy meal for an animal. They would definitely eat that. And in other places, if they can't catch or find food like a deer or an elk, they may go after smaller things like, there goes the wind again, things like squirrels or rabbits, even things like lizards or small birds. So they will go after smaller things if they can't find those bigger prey items. Now, wolves have very rarely attacked people, although we have a lot of stories in our history of the big bad wolf, things like Red Riding Hood, the 3 Little Pigs, Peter and the Wolf. Those have all caused a lot of fear among humans, even though it's been very rare that a wolf has attacked a human. And because of that, wolves in earlier times in human history were highly persecuted by people. And in the United States that occurred, and by 1930s, most wolves in the lower 48 states had been wiped out, with a few exceptions of a small population here and there. But those were wiped out because people felt that the wolves were eating too many deer or elk, or maybe going after livestock, or they were honestly afraid that the wolves may attack humans, and so they started wiping out wolves. And because of that, they were almost entirely wiped out, even though there was very few documented cases of wolves ever attacking people. So because of that, wolves got added to the endangered species list in the 1980s, and the federal government of the United States decided to designate an area of recovery for them as an endangered species, And that area was the Yellowstone Natural Ecosystem, which is Yellowstone National Park, Grand Teton National Park, and some of the national forest areas around those national parks. Even with that designation by the federal government, it still took them about a total of 20 years to get things implemented in place so that in 1995 they could reintroduce wolves into the Yellowstone ecosystem. And for those next 2 years, so in 95, 96, and 97, they imported some wolves that had been live trapped up in Canada and brought those wolves down and introduced them into Yellowstone in the backcountry areas, as well as a separate pack that they introduced in Idaho. During that time, 41 wolves were brought in from Canada, and it restarted wolves living in a thriving atmosphere in the lower 48 states, although there had been some wolves that had come down from Canada on their own in northern Montana near Glacier National Park. But the Yellowstone wolves is a particular note to scientists because they were really able to study them as they came back. And just a couple months ago, in January of 2020, that was the 25th anniversary of reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone National Park. And the wolves in Yellowstone are now the most studied large mammals in the world, and definitely the most studied wolf packs in the world. And they've been able to gain a lot of understanding and research on them. So we're going to talk quite a bit about Yellowstone wolves today. As of January 2020, on that 25th anniversary of reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone, there were 94 wolves living in Yellowstone in 8 packs. During the time that they've introduced wolves, that number has fluctuated as high as 171. Because they are now about half of that size, that is kind of natural checks and balances of nature, as they've kind of figured out how many wolves can really live in the Yellowstone ecosystem, how much prey is really available for those numbers, as well as now they have been delisted on the endangered species list, and hunting of wolves occurs in those surrounding states if wolves travel outside the national parks. So if they go into Montana, Wyoming, or Idaho, they can be hunted during those states' hunting regulations. That has also contributed to maintaining that balance of population where we sit now, typically around 100 wolves in the wintertime. That number goes up every year in the spring as new pups are born. Pups are typically born in Yellowstone around April. They start to come out of the den by the end of April, first part of May. And then they're kind of out and running with the pack by the end of summer. The first time I ever saw a wolf out in the wild was actually in Alaska. It was when I visited Alaska in 1991, and I was in Denali National Park. There was a wolf that came running down the road right towards us. We were in a tour bus driving through the park, and the wolf ran right alongside the bus, and I was in awe. The wolf was really tall. I was surprised how tall of an animal it was. It was by itself. It stayed maybe just a minute or two within our view and then was gone. But I definitely loved that opportunity to see a wolf, and definitely made a mark on me and my interest in animals. Later on, I have been able to see and watch wolves multiple times in Yellowstone. I've seen them run as a pack. I've seen them rendezvous at different points. I've seen them hunting in a varying degree, and I've definitely seen them eating on things that they have either killed or that they have found or taken from another predator. I've also heard wolves howl, which was really an amazing experience. I was watching wolves in an area of Yellowstone called the Lamar Valley, and there were wolves across the valley and up the other side on a hillside. We were watching them through spotting scopes. They were probably at least a half mile away. They were just little tiny dots even in the spotting scopes. But we heard them howl. And when we heard them howl, we heard howls coming from over here and behind us over here. So there were 3 different groups of wolves all howling together. The wolf researchers who were in that spot when I was seeing those wolves said that these wolves were all in the same pack. and they were communicating with each other kind of at the end of their morning hunting time to say, hey, where are you? Oh, I'm over here. I have so-and-so with me. Oh, we're over here. We'll see you later today, kind of thing. They keep in touch over long distances that way. Wolf communication is amazing, and it's a very eerie, haunting, and fabulous sound to be able to hear. In watching wolves, I also had a really cool experience one day. We were driving, it was my brother and I, and we were driving through Yellowstone National Park, and we noticed a large group of people, and there was kind of a shallow lake. There was some birds with a nest. I think they were cranes with a nest out on this lake in an island. And then there was one elk sitting there. And as my brother and I were driving by, we saw this, and we saw the number of people, and we thought, there has got to be something else going on besides these two birds with a nest and this elk. So we parked our car, we got out, and we learned that the elk was injured. It had a broken leg. One of its front legs was very severely broken, and there were 3 wolves who were patiently waiting to make an attack. And it was the middle of the day, so they weren't doing a whole lot. We watched for about a half hour. We were able to see some movement of the wolves up on the edge of the forest where the trees were providing them with some cover. We went around the park, explored the rest for the day, came back a few hours later. We watched those wolves again for probably the last hour and a half of daylight as they would move in to try to attack this elk that was injured. And she was very injured. Her leg was completely dangling and broken in front. There was no way she would have survived. Even if the wolves or other animals wouldn't have attacked her, she would have died probably within a couple of days just from the fact that her leg was so badly broken. But we watched these wolves, and we watched their coordination. They would communicate with each other through body language, and while one wolf would distract the elk and come in close, the other 2 wolves would go around the other side, coordinated effort, and then kind of rush towards the elk. Now this elk, she was still trying to fight for her life, and she ran into the water. And when the wolves came up, she would rear up on her hind legs and try to kick with her good front leg, and she was able to hold them off, at least in the time we were there. We stayed until it was dark, and then because humans don't have good night vision, our time watching this was over. So we didn't see the wolves make a kill, but we did see their valiant effort and definitely their coordination. There's a lot more information about wolves and how they've impacted the environment around them. I'm gonna share a video on the Facebook profile about some of the benefits that they've seen from reintroducing wolves into the Yellowstone ecosystem. Because not only have the wolves started to keep that huge population of elk in check and some of those other animal species, they've kind of eliminated a lot of disease from those big herds of ungulates, so the deer, the elk, the bison, but they've also shown a lot of benefit to other animals because the elk were severely overpopulated. It was estimated at one time that 90,000 elk lived in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem before wolves were introduced. And once wolves were introduced, that number has dropped significantly over time. Now it's also estimated that for wolves being in Yellowstone, they eat on average about 1 elk per wolf per month. That sometimes goes up a little bit during the summer, or if they eat more elk than other things. They are increasingly learning how to hunt bison. Bison are much bigger, much stronger animals, so it takes a big pack with a lot of coordination to successfully hunt a bison. Bison represent about 14% of a wolf's diet in Yellowstone. But other animals have definitely benefited because the elk were so overpopulated. Once the elk numbers became lower and got in check, a lot of things started to flourish. And the video I'll share on Facebook later today really highlights a lot of things, so check that out. Also, special shout out to Yellowstone National Park. It is one of my favorite places in the world. It has a lot of really great information. It's an amazing place. There's so many beautiful things to see in nature there. And it's also a really good research destination. So So a lot of research is constantly being done in and around the Yellowstone area with wildlife, with geothermal activities, and with just nature in general. So really amazing stuff through Yellowstone. I'll put up a special video about the wolves there that is really great to watch. But I hope you've enjoyed today's Critter Chat. I've enjoyed talking with you today about wolves. And take care of yourself, stay safe, stay home, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Have fun, enjoy.